So welcome this evening to our workshop for adolescents on how to get what you want. I'm Beth Mosley. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist working in the Psychology in Schools team, which is part of Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust. And with me tonight is Kelsey. Do you want to introduce yourself, Kelsey?
Yeah, thanks, Beth. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelsey. I'm a clinical psychologist, also working in the Psychology in Schools team. It's great to be here.
And later on in the show, not that it's a show, we've got Emily joining us. She's an assistant psychologist in our team, and we're going to do a few cringy role plays later on, and Emily's going to help us out with that. So she'll suddenly appear on our screens at some point. Great. So what are we aiming to do today? Well, we're just going to try and help think about the links between feelings, relationships, and how we can communicate. We're going to focus on the importance of how things are said, not just what is said. And we're going to really use new 6 effective communication strategies. We're going to kind of share those with you so you can go away from today, hopefully, and remember at least one of them. And the idea is we know, the research tells us that these communication strategies are really helpful, not only for helping us in our communication and helping us with our mood, but they're also really helpful in terms of helping us get what we want out of life and out of certain situations. So this will be really helpful if we can get your input on Slido on this. Who on this call finds that when they're in a bad mood, they get more easily annoyed with others? And I think it's going to, when I press click, great, thank you. So, okay, most of us are saying yes, and there's a couple of us saying sometimes. So what we know is that our mood affects the way we communicate and our relationships with others. What about when things aren't going well with our friends and family? Does this make us feel stressed and moody? So when you've fallen out with perhaps a parent or someone who's important to you, maybe a friend, does this affect how stressed and moody you feel? I know it certainly does for me. It can be one of the biggest reasons when I get home, I can feel a bit grumpy when things haven't gone well in the day with work and I feel like I might have upset somebody. What about when we're having a good time with our friends and family? How many people here find that good times with their friends or family or other people important to them mean that they're more likely to feel happy? And again, I think this is going to give us the answer and a click. Yes, and sometimes, it can be not enough, especially if we're struggling a bit with our mood. Sometimes it's not quite enough to help us feel in a better frame of mind. But generally, better times with friends and family leads to us feeling happier in general. So really what we know is that how things are going with our relationship can affect our mood. Our mood affects how things are going with our relationships, which again affects our relationships, which affects our mood. So I'll give you an example of this, and I'm sure you've all got examples you can think of. I've got a 12-year-old daughter, and literally at the weekend, we ended up having an argument because she wanted me to drop her at her friends at a point in time when I just couldn't drop everything to do it. So she got really upset and cross with me and started telling me what a rubbish mum I am. And then I ended up getting really cross with her and saying she was rude and inconsiderate and that I'm definitely, no matter what happens, she's not seeing her friends. Then she basically said, "Oh, I wish I lived with my dad," and went off. And I kind of said back, well, it's not a bad idea, because I was feeling really annoyed with her. And she basically went off to her room and spent the rest of the day there. She didn't get to see her friends and generally felt really annoyed with me and angry. And I think she felt a bit guilty as well about saying that she wished she lived with her dad. And I suppose I felt angry at first. And then I started to feel guilty about not being flexible enough and maybe not listening to her enough. And maybe I shouldn't have shouted at her so quickly. So we both were left feeling terrible. And we both were left with that experience of not either of us really getting what we wanted. And that can go on for a while. So I think she was quite upset for the rest of the day, and I was sort of feeling a bit grumpy for the rest of the day as well. So the key thing here is how we communicate with the people that are important to us can really influence how we feel. And the reason that's important is because quite often what we know is for young people, for adults too, is that when things are not going well in our relationships, we can find that we can start to experience quite a lot of low mood and anxiety. So being able to communicate well with our parents or our friends, being able to kind of get what we want, because it's really natural that my daughter wanted to see her friend. And what I found out later was that it was one of her friends who's recently left school, and it was her one chance to see her for months. But the way she asked me meant she didn't get the response she wanted. So are we going to think today about how could that scenario have gone differently, which would have maybe resulted in my daughter being able to meet up with her friend, and maybe resulted in both of us not feeling like we were so cross with one another. Okay, so when we think about communicating, there's lots of different people we need to communicate every day with in our lives. Some of those people we're very close to and are very important to us. We might see them lots, we might not see them as much as we want to. So it might be that certain people in your family are particularly important. You see them every day. What happens in our communication with them is going to really affect our life and our quality of life, because we'll likely be living in the same household, sharing the same space. We're going to have friends as well, and we're going to think a little bit more about how important friendship is in adolescence. It's so important. It's one of the most important things for most young people, is how their relationships with their friends are going, and having a friendship is really, really valuable. So friends are often important, particularly during that period of adolescence. There might be further who people are a bit less close to us. So the idea of this closeness circle is that the people right in the middle are the people closest to us, have the biggest impact on our life potentially. And then as the rings go out, they're the people we have less contact with, but we still, maybe they're important to us. So in this example, you've got people you might chat with online, but you don't know that well. And then there may be people that you see at school and you see in your class, you say hi to, but they're not really people that you feel very close to who know much about your life. So we're just going to have a think on this call today about who is important in your life. So you can choose more than one option here, and there's quite a long list. So have a look through that list and check off. And again, there's no judgment here. This is just to help you. The idea of this task is to help you think about who's important in your life, not necessarily for us on the screen. But so just have a think about who's important in your life. I'll just scroll down a bit. So here we can see that what people are putting is that the most important people for people on this call today are mum, friends, having a best friend, and if you might have ticked friends and best friend because both are really important to you. Your siblings, dad, and maybe if you've got a boyfriend or a girlfriend, again, they'll be important, and other family members. And we know quite often that grandparents and aunts and uncles can often have a really important role in our family life. So these are the key people in our life. So who out of all these people that you've picked has the biggest impact on your mood? So you kind of need to choose one now. So when things aren't going well, who might be the person on here the way you think, cool, that really affects how I'm feeling. And again, when things are going really well with that person, that also kind of improves your mood. So who would you say has the biggest impact on your mood? Okay, so when things are going well with mom, or not so well with mom, or brothers or sisters in your household, for some of you that's a real challenge. Again, for others it's friends, or for that very special boyfriend or girlfriend, that can be the real problem. So actually communication with those key people is going to be really valuable and important. Great. And someone's just added there that their teacher or someone who's important at school, if that person, how they interact with that person has a big impact on their mood as well as other family members. So it's really important to hold this in mind, because the thing we know is quite often the relationships that are the most important to us, the people we feel closest to, it's a bit of a double jeopardy. Those relationships going well can make us feel brilliant. Those relationships going badly, because we care so deeply about them, can make us feel really grotty. And they're often the people, like we said earlier on, that we're closest to. So we've got the most opportunity to communicate with. And what we know is that communication, and good communication, is going to probably lead to better mood and better happiness and better relationships with that person. And again, that bad, more difficult communication is going to probably have an impact on how well the things are going with that person, and then our mood. Thank you so much for joining inside Slido. So I guess, what's your goal for today? When you came along to the session, what did you think you would like to get out of today? I know the title is Get What You Want, but let's think a little bit more. And you can choose more than one option here. So is it that you kind of want to argue less with that important person or some important people in your life? Is it that you want to spend more time with some people? Is it that you want to find it better ways to handle it if you do fall out with someone? Or maybe you want to figure out the best way to negotiate what you want to get. So people here are saying less arguments, please. Arguments are so stressful. We're going to think about that in a little bit. And there's people on here who are wanting to find ways to spend more time with those important people in their life. And I guess with that time, you really want it to feel like good quality time. Again, this negotiating and getting what you want is great, because, you know, just like that situation with my daughter, you know, her seeing her friend is really, really important to her, and would have been a much nicer day for her than her sitting in her bedroom feeling like annoyed and alone. So kind of good communication can potentially sometimes lead us to get the outcomes that we want. Great. And again, when we fall out with people, kind of the time lag between falling out with someone and repairing that relationship, the longer that goes on for, the more painful it is. So me and my daughter were able to make up about that, because neither of us could manage too long with us being so grumpy with one another, because it creates an atmosphere and can make things really tricky. So I can really appreciate, for a lot of people, finding ways to handle it when you do fall out, particularly with friends, because it can be really tricky then going into school and things like that. Shortening the gap between falling out and making up and getting things repaired can be a huge relief, because you don't have to live with that awkward tension for so long. Okay. Now, why do we do this workshop and really kind of focus it on teenagers? I think it's really important to recognise that teenagers are facing so many challenges. They've got all the physical changes that come with growing from a child into an adult. And that includes brain chemistry changes. And we've done a workshop on adolescence for parents. And it's really interesting, even for young people, to look at, because it really describes how your brain starts operating differently. And one of the things we know about teenagers is that they're really needing to develop more autonomy and independence. And because of those changes that are happening in their brain, they're much more sensitive to negative feedback. So, for example, we know that if you show teenagers a set of pictures of faces of adults with neutral expressions, teenagers will say that those adults look angry. But if you show those same pictures to adults or children, they'll say that they just don't really show any expressions. So we kind of know that teenagers' brains are programmed to look out for negativity or people being unhappy with them. And this is really a kind of inbuilt survival mechanism, because adolescence is the most important time to build relationships outside of your family group. And so that's why friendship and peer relationships become so important. Because if you think about it, one of the biggest tasks of going from childhood to adulthood is that you're learning to kind of get on with life without your parents there helping you. You're moving towards being independent and taking on more responsibility. So that's a really tricky time of your life, because you're going from being a child towards being an adult. And sometimes your parents might still treat you like you're a child. And when you're a child, they often get quite involved with organizing your life. They kind of manage your life for you. But when you move into becoming an adolescent, you really are geared up to be managing your life yourself much more. And we, in our workshop that we do for parents, we try and encourage parents to think of themselves as coaches instead of managers, so that we're looking at supporting their teenagers but helping them make their own decisions. Another important thing to hold in mind, really important for your parents to know this, is that actually teenagers typically don't like being told loads of information by adults. They prefer to find things out for themselves. And they're really sensitive in their communication with adults about being treated with enough respect. And often, if you think about some of the discussions and arguments you might have had with your own parents, your parents probably in that moment are treating you maybe with a not enough respect for what you feel like you should have. And again, this is very much built into the way that the teenage brain is programmed. So you're looking to be treated more like an adult. And that's where these extra conflicts can come up at home, because you're kind of trying to negotiate these new balances. And again, friendships are really important. And sometimes that's a challenge for parents, because they're kind of finding it hard to work out how much you should be influenced by your friendship group, and how much time you should have with friends, and how much independence you can have, because they're still trying to protect you. And so a lot of the work that we do with parents is trying to help them be better at listening and not giving so much advice, and kind of tolerating their own feelings when they might be having difficult conversations with their teenagers, so that they can be in a non-judgmental and curious space. And that takes a lot of effort, because we're going to talk about this in a minute. Quite often when we're feeling anxious or worried or in the wrong frame of mind, our faces and body language give it all away. So you might start a conversation with your parent that you need some support or help with, and what happens is your parent's face changes. They start to get worried, and in your mind you're thinking, oh my goodness, I can't carry on telling you this because you're going to get cross with me. So quite often parents' faces looking worried also look like parents' faces looking angry. And that's immediately where body language changes, tone of voice can change, and all of a sudden it's really difficult to have those more difficult conversations, and things can escalate into arguments. So there's lots of reasons why communicating as a teenager is tricky. Communicating with your parents is tricky, and communicating with your peer group, because you're learning and developing new skills, and you're also kind of having these changes in your brain which are making, I suppose, you more sensitive to criticism and judgment. A lot of the young people I work with talk about how worried they are about revealing some of their thoughts because they are worried about being judged and criticized. And I have to remind this with parents all the time, that your teenager, your child is probably going to be really worried about what you think about their thinking. And that's really natural. So parents have to work really, really hard at this, because I think we get used to just kind of letting it all hang out. And so that's why, if any parents have joined today, this is a really helpful workshop for them, because these techniques work for them. Now, what we're going to share with you today is a 6 to 8 session group. And when we run this group with teenagers in schools, we kind of run it with 8 to 10 young people, and we cover the 6 techniques that we're going to be covering today. What we do is we include a couple of sessions with parents. And the reason we do that is because if you're trying some different stuff out with your communication, then your parents kind of really need to know what that is, and also learn and know the techniques themselves, so they can be a bit more mindful about how they respond to you. So it's important to have a think about what challenges you might have or face. What goes on for you. There are lots of things that go on in adolescence. So have a look here and see if you can pick, again, you can pick more than one. What are the kind of things that are tricky for you in your life in this last year? Great. So that kind of fighting and falling out with friends. And again, as I said earlier in the last slide, when we know what we know about how important friendships are in adolescence, it makes sense that actually falling out with your friends, the people that you really care about, and it has a big impact on your social life, is going to have a big impact. Again, we know there's so many pressures of school, and COVID hasn't helped. And there are so many other things that happen, like things that we need to grow and develop and do, like get a social life away from our parents, finding it difficult to talk to others about feelings, and kind of feeling lonely and isolated, as well as maybe trying to make new relationships and also losing people who are close to you. So I think it's just really helpful that you've filled in those slides. And of course, we were also trying to work out what to do next. And for any of you who are in that kind of year 11 stage, there's a lot of pressure to think about exams and then what next. So there's a lot there. So I think one of the things I can emphasize is a bit of self-compassion. So being kind to yourself. It's really tough being a teenager. And we often are very critical in our own brains about ourselves. And I always, with the work that we do with young people, I'm always encouraging young people to be as kind to themselves as they are to their best friend, because you're likely to be really kind to your best friend, but much harder on yourself. And that's a really important skill to practice. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the brain house, and we're then going to move on to these actual communication techniques. So emotions can make it difficult to communicate. There isn't a slider here, but I guarantee if I asked you, when you start to get upset or distressed and you're having a conversation with someone, does it all start to fall apart? And the answer is likely to be yes. And the reason behind that is because it's the way our brains operate. So this picture here is a really simple way of viewing the brain, and it's just really helpful because it helps us understand that some of the things that we do when we're really cross and really upset, and some of the things that we say and we really don't mean, are based on what is actually happening in our brain. It's not like a weakness in us. This is just the way our brain is set up to work. So in this brain house, we think about the brain as being kind of having an upstairs and a downstairs. Now, the downstairs part of the brain is the part of your brain that you're born with, which is there, well, the whole of your brain you're born with, but the downstairs bit is your emotional survival part of your brain. So it's all about those instincts. So it's about when you're a baby crying when you're hungry. It's where we have all of our emotions that come. So sadness, happiness, excitement, grief, anger. So the downstairs brain is full of emotion. And if you think about yourself when you were 2 or 3 years old, if you wanted a biscuit, you were going to have it, and you probably cry and have a big temper tantrum and throw yourself on the floor. And that's your downstairs brain just calling all the shots. Now, the upstairs part of our brain, which is upstairs, it's at the front of our head here. This part of our brain is the part of our brain that develops as we grow older and we mature. And that's the part of our brain that's all about reasoning, problem solving, language, being able to communicate with others. And what we need to do as we grow up, naturally, because you can't throw yourself on the floor and have a tantrum when you're 16 if you want a biscuit, is we need to help the upstairs brain get bigger and more developed. And we need it to sort of stay connected with the downstairs brain, with the staircase there. So when our upstairs brain and our downstairs brain are connected, we can feel a feeling and we can talk about it too. So, Mom, please can I have a biscuit? No, you're just about to have dinner. Okay, I'll have one afterwards. So that's your downstairs brain and your upstairs brain being connected. Your mum's saying no, and you're kind of, okay, dinner's nearly ready, I can wait. Now, if you're the toddler, then we talk about flipping the lid. In that moment of rage and distress, you lose your upstairs brain. It completely goes offline. And what we know is when we have arguments with people, that's literally what happens. We just go into our fight brain, our emotional brain, feelings take over, and literally our upstairs brain and our downstairs brain stop communicating. So that's why typically if you have a big argument with someone, you don't tend to get a good outcome. You don't tend to come up with solutions. And if both of you have flipped your lids, so the example of my daughter earlier on, where she made me cross and then I made her cross, and then our argument just got bigger and bigger, neither of us could get both of our brains online. It wasn't probably until the end of the day when we both had settled down and we were feeling a bit sorry for ourselves and each other that we managed to get those two bits of our brain connected and our upstairs brain on top of our downstairs brain and have a decent conversation. So the moral of the story is, and we're going to go on to that with our communication techniques, is when we start to notice that we're unable to think straight and we're getting cross and we're seeing red and our emotions are taking over, that logical reasoning part of our brain has gone offline, and we probably need to think about getting into a better space to have a conversation with someone, because in that space, we're probably going to say things we don't mean, and we're probably going to actually just add to our lids being flipped for longer. The things that help our lids get reconnected is feeling calm, breathing, and feeling connected. So if you've ever been in a situation where you've been really, really upset and somebody's just comforted you and connected with you and given you that comfort, then you'd have felt yourself feeling the feeling and then the feeling passing and then feeling like you can talk about it. So just hold on to that thought, because that's one of the things that is one of the key things to helping you be more likely to get what you want, is choosing your timing and being aware of when you flipped your lid or when someone else has flipped their lid, because that is not the time to have a constructive or helpful conversation about something that's really important to you. And if you're a parent or you're a friend who's got a friend who flips their lid all the time, then what you normally need is you need one of you who's got their lid still on to kind of provide some kind of comfort to the other one, or some time out, so that you can get into a better space to have those conversations. So we always say connection before correction, or connection before conversation. So you're making that comfort and connection. Just think about a little kid crying, really hurt themselves. You're not going to start trying to have a logical conversation with them. First of all, you need to pick them up, put them on your lap, give them a good cuddle, rub what they've hurt, and then they'll calm down and you'll be able to say, right, do you want to go and play, or do you need a plaster on that? And it's exactly the same with emotional stuff. It's just when we get big and we get cross, it's much harder to think about providing that comfort in that way. Okay. So I am aware that I'm probably taking too much time to go through this. So this is a really important point. What you say and how you say it is so important. It's not just what you say, it's how you say it. And the amount of times my kids say this to me, I'm like, what have I said? And they're like, Mom, your voice, your tone. So I think we're going to think about that now, because it doesn't necessarily matter what our words are. It could be the way we're saying something will impact on how a person interprets our message, which can then in fact impact on their reaction, which can then influence what happens next. So I'm going to do a little bit of trying this out with you. So, I'm going to say something to you now in a certain tone of voice, and I want you to put down how you feel, not how person B felt, but how you feel when I say this. Okay, be prepared, because I'm going to be cross. Oh, I'm giving you a clue, sorry. Okay. Maria, I feel sad when you talk about me behind my back. It hurts my feelings. So pop down on Slido how you feel when I'm saying that. Brilliant. Okay, so you feel, it makes you feel angry, makes you feel a bit frustrated as well. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to try it again now. Maria, I feel sad when you talk about me behind my back. Hurts my feelings. Oh, so actually, for some reason, the slide is not swapping over to the next one. So you're going to have to use the same thing again. I think you can put a new response in. So how did that make you feel when you heard that? I think you can click edit response and add a new response. So the same, exactly the same words, but my tone of voice meant that people started to feel sad rather than angry. There's a lot of mirroring here, isn't there? Okay, we're going to try a peer reaction now. Sorry, I haven't actually got these in front of me, so I've forgotten what they are. Can you remind me? Oh, wait a minute. Here we go. Here we go. So this is a pair. Oh, no. Sorry, Kelsey. I'm being a bit crap here.
Would you like me to say it?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
I've lost my notes.
So again, just imagine I'm a parent and I'm saying this to you as my child. Okay, so I'm gonna say something again and we'll go back to a different Slido. You're always on your phone and I never get to see you. So again, using the Slido.
Sorry, it's for some reason repeating it.
But I think again, you can go to the edit response at the bottom and just think about how you think I felt.
Great. So people said there's anger there, there's a bit of frustration, a bit of sadness as well. So do you want to try the next one?
The next one again. So I'm going to say the same thing again. Okay. You're always on your phone and I never get to see you. So again, how did that make you feel? So sad is going up again. Absolutely. So again, lots of mirroring there, isn't there?
Great, thank you, Kelsey. And I think that's the parent interaction, isn't it? Over the two ones we said. So this gives you, so I guess you will already know this a little bit because you'll say this to each other, won't you? When you're at home and somebody asks you to do something. I often shout orders at my kids like, get out and stack the dishwasher. And my kids are like, can't you just ask us nicely? It's not like we're not going to do it. But I think as parents, we often get this wrong, but often our children too. I find sometimes my children's tone can be different from maybe even what they mean. So first important thing to remember and to be aware of, and just clock this. What you say and how you say it matters. It can impact on your relationships and mood. And we're going to think about some other strategies now. And I guess the key thing is, if you remember what I said about the adolescent brain being much more sensitive to negativity, parents probably have to work a lot harder at changing their tone of voice and the manner that they speak to you in than you do back to them, if that makes sense. So if there are any parents on the call, how you talk to your child and the tone of voice, you probably have to work really, really hard at it, even harder than your teenagers do back at you, just because the teenage brain is programmed to be much more sensitive to negativity. I'm now going to hand you over to Kelsey.
Thanks, Beth. So as Beth said, that leads really nicely onto those 6 communication strategies that we're going to talk about really in turn. And as Beth sort of said there, the way that we communicate really does matter. So hopefully these strategies will be a helpful way to start to think about how we communicate with each other. So the 6 strategies you can see there that we're going to talk about really in turn are: strike while the iron is cold, I statements, be specific, have a few solutions in mind, put yourself in their shoes, and finally, don't give up. So as Beth said, we've got some role plays to show you to sort of illustrate each of them. They probably are going to be somewhat cringy, but please just bear with us, because we hope that will be a useful way to really illustrate and show you each of these strategies. So the first one is strike while the iron is cold. And this is all about picking the right time to have a conversation. So we need to avoid having those tricky, more difficult conversations when people are in that reactive state. So when people have flipped their lid, as Beth talked about earlier. So it's so much better to step away and take that time to calm down, to get that upstairs part of the brain back on. So we really need to consider the following when we're thinking about having some of these tricky conversations. So things such as, what is my mood like? What's their mood like? How distracted am I? How distracted might they be? So, you know, if parents are cooking dinner, for example, is that a good time to have a conversation or not? Is there enough time? And finally, is it a private enough space? Because we know that if both people are feeling angry, we're likely going to say things we regret. I mean, I know I've certainly been there many times when I've, you know, been really angry, been in a very reactive state and said things that I didn't mean. And we know that it's not going to be an effective conversation to have if we're having it in that more worked up state. So there can be 2 ways of doing this that we're going to illustrate in a second with our first role play. But the first is learning how to pause if a conversation is starting to get heated. So an example is, I'm getting really upset right now, and I would like some time to calm down and collect my thoughts. So can we talk about this later? And the second way of doing this is to ask the other person if they have time to talk, or schedule in a better time to talk. So again, thinking about when is the right time. So Mum, I would like to talk to you about something. Do you have time now, or is there a better time later? And what is really important is to come back to that scheduled time in order to strike when the iron is cold. So again, that leads us on really nicely to our first role play, and I can see that Emily has joined us now. Hi, Emily.
Hiya, can you see
Hi.
me?
Yes. I don't know if you're able to quickly introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Emily. I'm the assistant psychologist working with Beth and Kelsey.
Great, thanks, Emily. It's great to have you here. So I'm going to hand over now to Beth, who's the narrator for the first role play.
Okay, so in this role play, Kelsey's the parent. She's cooking dinner after Harley, who's that Emily, has had a bad day at school. Things are starting to get heated.
You never listen to me. You've always got other stuff to do, and I just don't matter.
You know that I'm busy and I can't talk about this right now.
See, there you go. I was right. You haven't got time.
So the parent at this point in time has recognised, hopefully, that now is not the best time for this conversation, as things are getting more heated. So they decide to pause the conversation.
I am feeling quite upset right now, and I just need some time to just calm down and collect my thoughts. But I can hear that this is an important conversation that we need to have. So can we talk about this after dinner?
So this is an example of how to pause the conversation when it becomes heated before it kind of escalates into that next level. So you can catch it early and ask to schedule a better time to talk, which you could both negotiate. And I guess the key thing is if both of you know that this is one of the things you're trying to do together, especially if you're prone to having arguments, it will help you as the young person trust your parent, that they're not just trying to kind of, you know, put something off that they're never going to do, or just trying to get rid of you, that they genuinely do want to have this conversation with you, but they're busy doing something else right now, or they're getting worked up right now. And I'm just thinking about the example with my daughter earlier on in the role play. I think if she had asked me, rather than just ringing me up and saying, Mom, I need to be dropped at my friends in the next half an hour, if she'd asked me if there was a good time that she could have a proper conversation with me, then we could have probably started that conversation off better, rather than her just being in that zone of it's suiting her, but I was right in the middle of something else that I was trying to deal with. So I didn't have proper time to deal with her either. So great work. So strike while the iron is cold, when both of our brains are hopefully with our upstairs brain and our downstairs brain connected without flipping our lid. It's a really simple strategy. Okay, next one.
Okay. So yes, so the next strategy is around I comments. And these, you know, these can be used to tell another person how you are feeling. So I think we can all fall into the pattern. Again, I know I certainly can, particularly with my partner. We can say these comments such as, you say this, or you did this, or you're so rude. And that can then make the other person we're speaking to actually feel quite blamed. I know I've been on the receiving end of that, and it can be really blaming, and actually means that you then get frustrated as the other person and stop listening. So we know that using these I statements, particularly I feel, are really important. So instead of you always interrupt me when I'm talking, you can say, I feel angry when you interrupt me, when I feel like I'm talking to you, because it feels like you don't care what I'm saying. And what's really key here is those I statements, those I comments give you the upper hand, because actually no one can argue with how you're feeling. No one can deny how you feel about things. And this helps you to gain power, especially when it's someone who cares about you. You know, as a parent, as a partner, as a friend, hearing your friend, you know, your loved one saying, I feel really angry with you, or I feel sad when, that has a lot more weight to it, and means that you're likely to move into a place of preparing or coming up with a negotiation together. And make sure it's I feel emotion rather than I feel you are rude. That's a really key thing to say there. So we're again going to move into our second role play now to illustrate some of this.
So Sarah, who is played by Emily, and her dad, who's played by Kelsey, have fallen into using you comments during a heated discussion.
You never do as I tell you.
Well, you never listen to me.
Can you think as an audience what I comments each of them could use instead? So just have a little think in your mind. And then we're going to now see them using some alternative statements.
I feel upset when I tell you something and it feels like you're not listening.
And I feel sad too that you feel that I don't listen to you.
What differences did you notice? I immediately could feel like it was a lot less heated. And I could sense in that second example that both the parent and the young person were more ready to listen to one another. Fantastic.
Great. You can really see how they both feel, I guess, you know, back into a place where they can negotiate and have a bit more of a discussion there.
So you're moving away from flipping the lid towards bringing people connecting. So that's another way of saying we're connecting there.
Mm-hmm.
So we can move towards negotiating.
Yeah.
Great. Next technique.
Thanks, Beth. So the next one is be specific. Okay, so this is so important, as the other two are as well. And we need to move away from that overgeneralizing. So that overgeneralization, you know, things like you always or you never. And again, you know, I'm really guilty of this. If my partner doesn't empty the dishwasher, that can then I can fall into a pattern of saying, well, you never do anything around the house. Actually, I'm not being specific enough about what he might not be doing. And actually, we know that this can make the other person generally feel quite bad, and then therefore less likely to listen to the messages that, you know, you're trying to give them, and also could escalate quickly into an argument. So therefore, it's really important then to try and stay focused on the present rather than the past. So again, that example of the dishwasher, that's the thing that I need to focus on rather than anything else that's happened before that. And actually being prepared with a specific example that's happened recently is really key here. So again, thinking back to my dishwasher example, I can say, actually, you know, this has happened several times this week. So for example, yesterday, you didn't unload the dishwasher. That's very different conversation to you didn't unload the dishwasher and you never do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we've got another role play. So I'll hand back over to Beth as the narrator again.
Yep. So in this situation, Emily's sister has borrowed her clothes without asking again.
You're always taking my clothes and then I can't wear them when I want to. You're just always really inconsiderate of me.
I don't always take your clothes. That's just not true.
In this situation, things are likely to get heated and result in an argument. Let's consider what Emily could have said differently.
I feel frustrated that 2 times in the last week you've taken my pink top without asking me.
Okay, you are right. I know that I did only borrow them twice, but I can see why you're a bit annoyed. So next time I'll ask, okay?
So you can kind of straight away feel the differences in these two statements. And we know we're exaggerating the good outcome versus the bad outcome. So it might not be this simple in real life, but you can probably get a flavor that the conversation, the way that that conversation starts is going to, and the way that you respond to any further discussions is going to hopefully lead to a very different outcome. So, and again, this all takes practice, which is why when we run this as a group, we do it for 6 to 8 weeks, because what we do in each session is we actually just practice each one of these techniques for the whole session, doing loads of role plays. It's actually really good fun. Fantastic. Okay.
Thanks, Beth. So the next strategy is around putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So understanding another person's perspective, whilst also expressing your own feelings, is actually really important and then makes it easier to come to that compromising. So understanding another person's perspective, it's really important to say, doesn't mean you necessarily agree with their perspective, but it just means that you're able to place yourself a bit more in their, in their shoes and see things a bit more from their perspective. And this really involves 2 key steps. So the first is thinking about how the other person feels. So, you know, what might be the things that they're experiencing right now. And the second is communicating to them as a way to diffuse the argument. So again, another example is, Mum, I know you're worried that something bad will happen to me when I'm out with friends, but I feel embarrassed when you keep calling me. So again, this is another one I can really relate to. I remember well being the teenager whose mum would always call them when I was out. And I think the way that I handled that probably wasn't as good as putting myself in my mum's shoes there. You know, I use a lot of those you statements, you know, you always call me, you're inconsiderate. Actually, what would have been more helpful with hindsight is putting myself a bit more in my mum's shoes and realizing she's probably just really concerned about me and wanting to check that I was okay. So again, we've got another role play. So I'll hand back over to Beth.
So in this situation, Justin, played by Emily, and Rob, played by Kelsey, are having a discussion around Justin feeling left out when Rob plays football with other friends every lunchtime.
Rob, it's unfair and out of order when you always go off and play football with Tom every lunchtime.
I like playing football, and if I want to play football, then I'm going to.
So Justin doesn't want to fall out with Rob. Can you think what might be helpful for Justin to do? We wonder if him putting himself in Rob's shoes would be helpful.
I know that you like playing football, and I get that it's important to you. So I'm not asking you to stop playing. It's just, it would be nice if we could hang out a bit more, because I feel upset if I don't get to see you very much.
I didn't realise you felt upset, Justin, but you're right. I could probably spend a bit more of my lunchtime with you.
So again, we've kind of kept the conversation short, but to kind of show how it feels when we try the different approaches. And I tell you what, if my daughter had understood what was going on for me when she made that call earlier on, and I'd understood how important it was to her, and I put myself in her shoes more, then I think we could have quickly negotiated something different than the outcome that we actually had.
Okay, so the fifth strategy is having a few solutions in mind and remembering to compromise. So this is about thinking what solutions that you could hold in mind after a conflict around how that conflict could be resolved. So again, once you've found a nice calm time, you've struck while the iron is cold, you've used I statements, you've put yourself in the other person's shoes, you can then approach the problem with some of these solutions in mind. And it's important, I guess, to be flexible in the moment, because the other person may also be bringing some solutions to the conflict. So having in mind maybe, 3 solutions that could be thought about together. And then it's important, finally, to then follow through on what you decide in terms of the solution you pick together to try and resolve that conflict. So again, I think I'm going to hand back over to Beth, who's going to talk through some of the potential solutions for the previous role play.
So some of the solutions that Rob, was it Justin, could have asked Rob to consider when they were having their discussion and may have thought about beforehand, is maybe for Rob to play football on certain days and hang out with Justin on other days. So that could have been a good suggestion he could have made. Or maybe even Justin could join in and play football. Or perhaps just for Justin to accept that Rob plays football at lunchtimes and then hangs out with him during break times or after school. And I guess some of the things that you might be coming to your parents with that you kind of we think about kind of wanting to spend more time with friends, maybe wanting to do more things without your parents' supervision. I guess it's before you go into that discussion, kind of making sure that you've had an idea about some of the compromises that you'd be willing to make. So going to a kind of big event, I suppose, or a party or something is probably like one of the things that you might be asking your parent for. And I guess if you're going into that discussion knowing your parent is likely to say no, it's thinking about some of the compromises you'd be willing to make. So, okay, well, perhaps I could go with my friend and their parents are dropping me off, and you can pick me up a bit earlier because I wanted to go till midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. But okay, if you pick me up at 11:30, then that's a compromise, better than not going. So I think there's something here about both parents, sorry, my dog's shaking his head, parents and young people kind of having that kind of flex to be willing to compromise.
Great, thanks, Beth. So the final strategy we're going to talk about today is don't give up. So we know that this is so hard for all of us, in all of our relationships. Beth and I have both been sharing just a few examples really of the things that we find difficult in our relationships. But we know, linking back to that earlier slide about adolescence and that sort of really all the challenges that come with that, we know that this is going to be particularly important, and difficult during that period for adolescents, but also for parents who are parenting adolescents. So we know that changing the way that we communicate and behave in our relationships with one another is not easy, because we all fall into these same patterns over and over, that get repeated. And even though we can see that actually we'd like it to change, it is difficult. So it's important to say that we can all make mistakes, and as we're learning something new, we will all make mistakes, and that's okay, because it's not about getting it right all of the time. But this is just a key message to say, don't give up on learning new ways to communicate, on solving those interpersonal problems that are important to you. You know, thinking about those closeness circles, it's often those people that are in the center of the circle that we often have, you know, some of the most challenges with in terms of our relationships. So it's focusing on what really matters to us and solving and working hard to not give up on solving some of those interpersonal problems. And if you keep trying to use a strategy and find it's not working for you, recognize this and adapt it to find one that does work for you. So you may need to just change some of the expectations for both of you around what is possible. And actually, over time, you know, if you keep persevering, if you keep practicing and persisting, you can expect to see some difference over time. But it will take time. We know that change takes time, even if this is hard. So really, that key message here is do not give up, because relationships are so important.
And just to add to that, really, that often when things go wrong, it is an opportunity when we get kind of in the right mindset for repair. And when you've got relationships with people in your family who you live with and you see so regularly, you know, they can actually often feel like you've really messed up either as a parent or a teenager. You can kind of have that awful feeling that, oh no, it's gone too far this time. But I kind of always think most people really don't want to be in that state of conflict, and they do want to repair the relationship. And often, if you can get that little bit right, you can actually build much bigger strength within your relationship. And you can kind of learn what to do well or not so well next time. So again, don't see things as going wrong as like, that's it, I failed, this is a disaster, and it's now going to be 2 days of kind of not communicating well with the people I care about. Try and move towards, give yourself a bit of time, be kind to yourself, be kind to the other person, and then find a really good time to do some of this stuff. And again, we're going to send it round to you so you'll have an opportunity to have a closer look at it.
Absolutely. So we wanted to sort of end before we finish with our final two Slidos on an inspirational quote. So this is a quote from Barack Obama, particularly thinking about relationships. So it's important to make sure that we're talking with each other in a way that heals and not in a way that wounds. So I think for me that talking with each other, rather, you know, I think that use of language there is very subtle, but it really highlights that important message, you know, doing it alongside being collaborative in, you know, trying something different. And actually really that importance of the way that, you know, the way that we talk to each other. So doing that in a way that heals is so important and really is the key message from this whole workshop. So we're just going to think about the final two Slidos.
And I guess I was just going to say one last thing there, like one last caveat really, that sometimes we can be in relationships with friends or even kind of a boyfriend or a girlfriend, which can often feel like you're trying really hard to do that, to have a positive relationship, but it's really hard to break free from maybe some destructive ways of communicating or feeling like you're in quite a toxic relationship. So I guess there's something about kind of recognizing that, you know, about looking after yourself really, that sometimes it can be really difficult in some relationships to, despite doing all of these things, make it work. And I guess that's where you really want to reach out to other people in your life that you trust, to kind of talk with those people about how you manage that, because that's really difficult sometimes when you really care about people but you think that they're having a negative impact on your well-being or the way you're feeling about yourself, and actually it's becoming really difficult to have some of those really helpful conversations because of perhaps the way that they're behaving. So I guess it's sometimes I just want to acknowledge that there are relationships where it is really difficult. You can be doing a lot of the work, but on the other side, you're not really getting that same kind of feedback or investment. And again, that's where using your communication to talk to other important people you trust can be really helpful to work out what to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Beth, isn't it? I guess specifically thinking about those closeness circles as well, and who else have you got that you're close to that you can have some of those important conversations with in a helpful way?
And that's
Okay.
us finished. Sorry, we probably have been an hour since we started recording, but we've just run 5 minutes over. So yes, I hope that it's been a helpful session. Again, it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour today. We're trying to kind of help you in a short session, and ideally it would be lovely to be able to do this work over a number of sessions. So we hope it's been helpful today. Thank you for your feedback. And I guess it would be really nice for us to know what 2 things you'll take away from today's session. Sometimes we have to do condensed versions of these sessions, and we always take what the audience say, and we never cut those things out when people have put the most important things that they're going to take away from the session. And I guess the other thing we know is about human beings is if you can name 1 or 2 things that you think that you can definitely do from today or from tomorrow differently, you're much more likely to start using those things. So by naming 2 things or just thinking about 2 things now that you think you'll definitely take away from today's session as being helpful, will help you be more likely to be able to go on and try some of those things out yourself. So we really value this feedback, and hopefully it'll be helpful for you as well. I think my dog has just run upstairs to do a wee.
Oh no, upstairs.
And I can't shout at my kids, come and let the dog out. Oh, I think that's a really important. So that's really nice to hear that Struck by the Anaconda is an upstairs and downstairs brain, and that kind of reflection to hold in mind that not everybody's angry with me. And for anyone who's interested, what we'll do is when we send the resources around, we'll send the links to some of the other workshops that are recorded and on YouTube. So there's a couple of ones that will probably be really helpful for young people and parents. So one is the workshop we do on low mood, because we know that challenges with relationships can make mood more challenging for young people. And also the other one is on adolescence. So if you want to know more about what's going on in the adolescent brain and some of these chemical changes that can make life feel more tricky, as well as more positive in lots of ways, then those are 2 really good workshops to access. So we'll send you those recordings so you can look at them in your leisure. Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you so much for committing your time, and we look forward to maybe seeing you again on one of our other workshops.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening.
Bye.